Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I am Christine Dixon of The Ordinary Sacred, and I'm really excited about today's video. So every now and then I will do a rant. And a few months ago, I did a rant about religion and religious burdens. And today I'm going to do one on education. And every time I do one of these rants, I am calling on some supportive energy from a part of me named Sebastian that holds the value for self-agency, self-value, autonomy, freedom, those kinds of things. So you'll hear that energy. And both religion and education fall under this umbrella of authoritarianism, which is really this mindset and practice that is power, hierarchy, and power over. So anyone who is perceived as higher ranking has power over those who are under them, whether that's a parent-child relationship or a teacher-student or a pastor, priest, imam over their parishioners, or it's a boss over a worker, a government official over the citizen, a doctor over their patient, right? So there's this hierarchy of power over, and it is sanctioned to use external motivation, punishment, reward, shaming, fear to keep people in line, to manipulate them into doing what is perceived as the right thing. Okay, so this is kind of, especially in the West, this is the air we breathe. And so it's pervasive in all of these systems. And I hope maybe to do a rant about each one of them. But today I want to focus on education. And the reason why this has come to the forefront for me is that there's been all of these different things happening in this last week. First, I was listening to a podcast, and there was a man on who was a game developer. It was very fascinating. And he started talking about once he had children, his children entered school, the school system. And in passing, he says, and I thought, wow, school is a really poorly designed game. And both he and the host just start laughing. And he says, yeah, we're laughing because of the recognition of the truth of that statement. It's such a poorly designed game. It does not foster internal motivation, fascination, multisensory, all of the things that game developers know to be true about genuinely motivating people. School does not follow. So I thought that was interesting. And then my husband Brian and I like to go on Sundays to a bookstore and have some coffee or tea and just look through a book. And this last Sunday, I was looking through the book called 4,000 Weeks by Oliver Burkeman. And he was talking about this concept of finitude and how we only have so much time and energy in this fleshly human life, our spirit's experience in these bodies on this planet. And so instead of making it about all the things we want to get done, what if we focus on the things that we do not want to do, right? Because when we weed out the things we do not want to do, it makes space and room for us to follow our fascination and do the things that give us meaning and purpose and fulfillment and well-being. And I thought that fit really well into school and what school does not do. And so finally, the third thing, I usually look for three kind of prompts. The third thing that happened this week was I saw a reel on Instagram where this homeschool mother put all of these images of her kids creatively making food and building things and growing food and being outside and running and playing and all these things. And then there was someone talking over it where they were telling about how there was this study that was done in the 60s, the 1960s, and it was commissioned by NASA. They commissioned a man named George Land to do a study to identify creative genius, because they were trying to look for, future NASA employees that had what they needed to create. And in this study, George Land found that 98% of 5-year-olds, he started with these kindergartners, 98% of them qualified as creative geniuses. And then he would retest them with these measures, right, of being flexible and creative at later ages, the same group of kids. And by the age of 10, only 13% of them qualified as creative genius. And then they stopped funding the study, but George Land continued and tested the same group again in adulthood and found that only 2% of them qualified as creative genius. And when asked, what is the reason for this? He said, there's one culprit, the school system. And he talked about how you have to learn to not be creative, that our natural birthright is creativity. That is who we are at our core. If you know IFS, you know that one of the natural qualities of our capital S essential self is creativity. And so it really has to be conditioned out of us. Blocks have to be put into place. And so it's really about returning to that. And it's such a tragic thing that kids are put through this rigorous process of conditioning out their creative genius. Now, there are many people who choose to put their kids, say, in Montessori schools, where it's really focused on play and work and letting the child have internal motivation. But as far as I know, I don't think there are Montessori schools or many such schools that go up into high school or even college level, unless it's an art school, maybe. And there are people who do homeschooling and even unschooling, which is really about allowing a child to follow their fascination. But I had this question of, can the school system itself be changed? So just a little bit of history. The education system as we know it now, in the West at least, was developed about 200 years ago during the Industrial Revolution, and it was designed to help create factory workers. And so there's an article where they are unapologetically saying that they want to produce future factory workers to be, quote, punctual, docile, and sober, end quote. And this is exactly what I personally learned how to do in school. I was obedient. I followed authority. I did not think for myself. I didn't have too much ambition outside of what I was told to do. I was very compliant. And I was rewarded for that. So now, prior to this development in education, people were apprentices and artisans and farmers, and they had control over their own schedule, and they focused on the area of expertise or fascination that they wanted to have. It was much more flexible. They were often able to have a well-balanced life, get outside, move, like I said, create their own schedule. But when this need for factory workers came in the Industrial Revolution, there was a need to create workers to fit into that mold. However, we are currently in what is called the post-industrial period. So it's time for us, it's been time for us to reimagine what education is, isn't, what it looks like, for us to go forward in a way that honors our well-being, individually and collectively. So, interestingly, another thing that happened this week at my son's school, he's a senior in high school. They have this thing where if you have under 5, maybe it's under 4 or 5 absences in a semester, you can be exempted from a certain number of final exams. And now the first week of school of my son's senior year, he was extremely ill. I think with strep throat or something. It might have been COVID. I don't know, but it went into and created this abscess on his throat, extremely painful. He had to go into the emergency room, and the next day he had to have an inpatient surgery. And so he had to miss that first week of school. So now he cannot exempt finals. And so he started exploring this and pushing back and saying, look, it was the first week of school. It hasn't affected my grades. I'm doing well in all of my classes. I've shown on all my tests that I know the material. Should exemption not be based on that? And so he's getting a taste and a feel for the fact that it's not about his well-being. It's about showing what he knows. It's about the money that's coming from the government for the school. And so they're trying to create this reward system and punishment system on the flip side if kids don't come to school. And this was true when I was in high school as well. I remember going to school on countless days feeling deathly ill. I wasn't even thinking about the fact that I am, getting other people sick in those moments. I just had to go, or else I would be punished. I would fall behind. My grades would suffer. There would be so much stress. So I had to go to school sick. So there's this encouragement of that. And I was so relieved actually during COVID when they would say, if you are feeling ill or you have a fever, please stay home. And they actually took away this rule about exemptions at the time because they didn't want kids coming to school sick, but I guess we've returned to it and now they want them to come to school sick. So I called the school and I asked them about it. And I said, is there any way it could be seen as a legitimate absence? And they said, well, only if he had come to school that day, left in the middle of first period and gone to the emergency room, if he had been at school for even a small period of time. And I'm thinking, so it's all about the money. It's all about, you have to show that you came to school so that we can get our money. It has nothing at all to do with the actual well-being of the students, not one bit. So I was proud of my son for seeing that, for speaking up against it, and understanding that a lot of times in a system and the way things are done, really getting curious about what is the motivation there. Right? It's, again, for them, the bottom line is their funding. So I want to point out, I'm going to get to some hopeful things in a moment, but the current system is not only bad for those who struggle within it. So I was an educational therapist for over 20 years, and I worked with kids with learning differences who did not fit into the box of school, right? This very neatly prescribed box of the compliant, mostly auditory learner that has good executive functioning and organizational skills and has a calm body and all of those things. They didn't fit into that. And so they really struggled. And there's a very clear downside to that. They're shamed and ridiculed. They're punished. There's trauma that goes on for them that they have to unpack years and years later. Symptoms of depression, anxiety, suicidality, addiction, all kinds of things as a result of that are very problematic. But the school system, the way it's set up, is also very damaging to the students who do succeed within it. So one of the people who attends my weekly Tuesday IFS group, when she heard that I wanted to do a rant about education, wrote to me and wrote some incredible thoughts that I resonated with all of these issues with the school system. I'll just read a few of them. Not celebrating different learning styles or different forms of intelligence, learning things that we'll never use, testing in stressful ways that don't really show what we know, lacking trust in the children's ability to direct themselves, fostering people pleasing, focusing on grades as the end all, systems being continuing long after they don't work anymore, creating one mold, not encouraging individuality, and just creating this giant pressure cooker. But what I really loved that she said that I resonated with as a quote unquote good student and how it affects those of us who do succeed. For example, I was valedictorian of my high school, straight A's in junior high and high school, straight A's in college, summa cum laude in college. But her experience describes mine. She says, shout out to you, Hallie. She says, I was a very good student, and that became my identity. It made me feel good. It was how I found value in myself. But it was so stressful, and I didn't really take in information. I remember almost nothing from school, and I went to excellent private schools with gifted teachers, some of whom used shame to help us learn. It wasn't okay to make mistakes because mistakes meant bad grades, which meant bad student, which meant bad child. This is what our parents and teachers talked about, our grades. I grew up in an apartment building that sat on top of Blockbuster Video, and I remember we could get free rentals if we had good grades. So again, punishment and reward is really reinforcing this external motivation that is really attached to our core worth as a human. And so we learn people pleasing, perfectionism, really, really burdened parts that tirelessly work to give us worth. And it works within the school system. And then we get out into the real world. And one, it often doesn't work, or our bodies begin to break down. Or yeah, we begin to get chronic illnesses. Those parts are so desperate, and when it doesn't work, we might feel anxiety, depression, suicidality, all of those things. Because that's not where we actually get our worth, right? So it's a lie, it's an illusion, it's a foundation of sand, right? That sets us up for failure, for disappointment, for a lot of suffering. So even when we do well in the system, we suffer from it. All right. So now I want to get to some practical things of what does an alternative look like? So I want to focus now on an incredible teacher that my youngest son had in 3rd grade. So in 2nd grade, my son every morning and every night would say, I hate school, I hate school, I hate school, I don't want to go to school. It was excruciating to watch. I finally at one point said, I'll homeschool you, I'll do whatever I have to do, you know, you're suffering so much. He didn't want to leave his friends, he didn't want to do that. But it was clear that school was excruciating for him, even though he was getting A's and doing very well. Until 3rd grade, when he had Mrs. O'Donnell. And at one point, I wanted to write a book about Mrs. O'Donnell because she was doing everything countercultural. She was not doing the normal school teacher thing. And I was fascinated by it. My son loved school. He woke up in the morning so excited to go. On days, you know, when they were about to get off for holidays and they could leave early if they wanted to, he didn't want to. He wanted to spend every possible second in Miss O'Donnell's class. That's how much he loved it. He still talks about it. I actually interviewed Miss O'Donnell a few years back because I wanted to write about this. And I interviewed a bunch of her past students, and every single one of them said she was their favorite teacher ever. And these are kids who are now in high school, had her, in third grade. And they said she was the single most person that helped them in their life. So I want to describe to you what her classroom was like. As I went through all of these things that she did, I then took the opposites, and that defines the general current school system. So one of the things is that Miss O'Donnell allowed each child to work in their area of strength and interest. Now, when I interviewed her, she told me that she was approached to have the GT class, the gifted and talented class. And she told the principal, I don't want just the quote unquote gifted kids. If you want, give me a remedial or a special education class, you can call it, but I want a mix of the gifted and the remedial, struggling kids. I want them to all be together. And so so she allowed parents to come in and volunteer and support her. So I would go in and I would observe that every student in her class was celebrated. There were not lines of this one's gifted and this one is remedial. There was no hierarchy based on achievement. Instead, they had equal worth, but their individuality was also celebrated. So she would identify at the very beginning what their strengths were, what their fascination and interest was. And she would say, we're going to spend the majority, or you're going to spend the majority of your time in that area. And then she would have them identify just one area of growth that they wanted to make, quote unquote, weakness, right? What was one area they wanted to work on to get better in? And I remember one student coming to me and telling me that her area of growth that she told Miss O'Donnell was, I want to learn how to make friends. And so Miss O'Donnell helped her with that the whole year. And this girl was so sweet. She said, she still has very close friends from that class, because she would try things and she would come back to Miss O'Donnell and she'd say, oh, this didn't work. They didn't like that when I did that. And Miss O'Donnell would just lovingly go back and forth and help her experiment and try things and push her boundaries a little bit with people until she could make friends. But Miss O'Donnell took this social aspect of making friends as seriously as anything in math, reading, and writing and arithmetic, right? This was the thing that this student cared about. And so she was going to help her with it. So she could set them free in their area of strength and fascination and let them run with it. So there was a lot of autonomous freedom, independence, with each student doing very different things. And then individually, they would come to her to help come alongside them in their area of growth. And they were all individual. Every person had something different they were working on. There was one girl who wanted to learn her times tables. So that's what Miss O'Donnell worked with her on, and there was another student that wanted to learn just how to work on their shyness and speak up a little bit more. So that's what she worked on with them. She believed them about what they wanted to grow in. She also had them work together to solve problems. So for example, when I was called in to volunteer, the students decided that they wanted to work on the problem of drought. And she didn't say, oh no, that's too big, you're third graders. No, she said, all right, cool. At that time, Texas was experiencing a drought. California had been experiencing drought. And she had them identify the areas that they wanted to work in. So some kids went to the computers and researched and looked online to understand drought. Other kids came up with, they developed these experiments, these scientific experiments of how to extrapolate the salt from ocean water, or, you know, what are different solutions that we could come up with. And they made models of it. They did experiments. Other kids, so my kid and what I was helping with was they made a whole dramatization of this news story that we videotaped and put music to. So these were the creatives, right? Where they were making a video and acting out this whole story of drought and how they were going to solve it. And then every day, all the kids would convene, kind of like a meeting in a boardroom. And she would say, okay, you know, raise your hand and tell me what you learned today about drought, or what did you do today that you're proud of, or what do you want the group to know about? And they would excitedly raise their hands and say different things. I remember there was one kid who always had, you know, someone would have an idea and he would say, I don't know. He was kind of the naysayer, the skeptic. That might not work because of this, because of that. And Miss O'Donnell could have very easily shut him down. But he said, she celebrated him. She said, we always need a person like this, that's the skeptic, that says, but what about this? But what about that? You have such a valuable voice in this group. I remember there was a boy with autism, very, very intelligent, but really needed to move around and would get activated by certain things. So she would support him, and he was allowed to walk around the group. And I remember asking my son about it. Does that bother you? Is it difficult that he's different? Does it feel like he's different than the other kids? And my son said, oh no, he's incredibly intelligent. And he just learns in a different way than I do. And you could see that Miss O'Donnell had instilled this in him and in all the students. She celebrated the uniqueness and the strength of each person rather than creating this, you know, higher than, less than comparison. It was really beautiful to see. Okay. She definitely worked in multisensory ways, catering to all kinds of learning styles. She did a lot of hands-on application. I remember going in and were using math and fractions and baking and making cookies. They would go outside and you know, plant seeds and watch them grow and take care of them and harvest the food. They would do a lot of acting and dancing and moving around. They would go outside in nature. And things were based on real life application of whatever they were learning, right? So it was using all their senses. It was hands-on. It was practical. And they had this inner motivation and direction. She was constantly checking with them about what they wanted to do, or if they wanted to do something in a different way. She met their resistance with curiosity. Okay, how could this look different for you? And she respected each child. And the end goal really was enjoyment, connection, and just learning, fascination. And so I remember when I interviewed Miss O'Donnell, it was interesting to find out that while the students and a lot of the parents absolutely adored Miss O'Donnell because they saw their students thriving and growing and loving learning, she got so much flack from the administration. She was not following the rules. She wasn't preparing them for the state test. She wasn't putting in the types of grades that they wanted her to. She wasn't evaluating them in the way, you know, what reading level, math level are they in? Her evaluation was, do they love to learn? Do they love to be here? Are they intrinsically motivated to learn? But that wasn't the measurement of the principal and the administration. So eventually she was pressured to retire, but not before she impacted many, many lives in a significant way. Okay, so I'm just real quickly going to go through what's the opposite of what Miss O'Donnell did. And you'll see this is how the traditional school system is. We are forced to work long hours in our areas of weakness. Many strengths, especially in creativity, are not celebrated. There's a one-size-fits-all. Everyone does the same thing. Everyone has the same expectations. Conformity is celebrated. There's a hierarchy. There's a lot of comparison, and you're better or worse. Not you all have innate worth and just difference and individuality. Again, this authoritarianism that others dictate the goal for you. You're not internally motivated or encouraged to think for yourself or check with your body or learn from your emotions. It's really, what does the teacher say? That's what I have to do to succeed here. There's a lot of working separately, not collaboratively, all doing the same thing, but separately. There's little or no time spent in areas of strength. There's not a lot of celebration of strength, except strength of getting the good grade, getting the right answer, right? Yes, and then it's celebrating with balloons. The main focus is usually on auditory input, some visual input, but there's really usually little hands-on movement going outside. It's usually sitting still in a desk in a controlled climate environment in the classroom, right? There's a focus on a lot of theory, not a lot of practical experience or real life application. There's a lot of focus on intellectualism and on the mind, the figuring out analytical parts of ourselves, and little focus on the experiential embodied parts of ourselves. It's not holistic. And any kind of social focus is usually around like punishment and just staying in line. Again, very focused on external motivation using punishment and reward and grades, right? The end goal is usually to achieve so that you can go to college, get a good job, make money, and be useful to society. The end goal is not well-being or happiness or, having a well-rounded, healthy life. Okay, so last thing I'll say about this, because I do want to just really provide hope and vision. That's why I gave you the example of Miss O'Donnell. I do think it takes a special person that really has to have a little bit of anti-authoritarian bucking the system, and they may not be accepted within the system. But as we as individuals first really unburden our own parts who have been conditioned in this way, we unburden those parts and we resurrect our autonomy, our freedom, our inner compass, our emotions, our needs, our authenticity, our fascination, our creativity, right? As we unearth that and that comes up and we're connected to it, that's where we start. Then we begin inspiring our children, our friends, our family, other people to connect to their own inner authority and inner compass. And gradually, from the bottom up, we begin seeing a change, is how I envision it to be. So here's just some quick suggestions. Whether it's within the school system or outside, whether it's with your children or with yourself, with your inner children. It's never too late to start this. If you are in your 90s, you can do this. One is a return to play. That there's no failure, only feedback. That's what play is. This isn't so serious. It's not pressure. So much is riding on this. I'm playing, I'm experimenting, I'm seeing what will happen. In myself and in my clients, I run into these parts all the time that are afraid of getting it wrong, right? The perfectionist parts, I've got to figure it out. I've got to get it right or else. These are conditioned mainly through parenting, through school, that if you get it wrong, you will be punished. You will get a red mark through your paper. You will get shamed, ridiculed, rejected, criticized, bad grade, right? And so those parts really need to be unburdened. Allow ourselves and our children to follow our unique passions and interests. You know, when we've been conditioned in this way to always be seeking external approval, external direction, sometimes we don't have any connection to what it is that we love to do, right? Sometimes it's even been taught to us that it's selfish to follow what we love to do, or it's lazy, or it's not useful, right? So it can be an experimentation at the beginning of what is it that makes me move forward in fascination and curiosity and awe and excitement? What are the things that I do where I lose track of time because it's just, I'm so absorbed, I'm in the flow in this, right? Really observing maybe in the past before you entered school or when you were on summer break, or now really reconnecting to some of those things. And it's going to be different for each one of us. It's a beautiful exploration. Yeah, there's no one size fits all. It's individual, different for every person. Another thing to practice is just being present and fluid, just being in this moment, listening to our body, listening to our emotions, and really connecting with what it looks like, what's called our body compass, or our inner compass. What does it feel like in our body when we expand and we move? Our body just naturally moves towards something because we're fascinated by it, versus when our body contracts and we have this aversion response. No, I don't want to do that, right? We're not given permission in school to follow that, right? I don't want to do this project. I don't want to write this long essay. I don't want to read Moby Dick. I don't, my body goes, ooh, but I can't. I have to do it or else, right? So it's experimenting with giving ourselves permission to at least notice our body's responses. This has been a huge journey for me. Eventually learning how to connect with my body, I would notice the response, the attraction response versus the aversion response. But I had these perfectionist parts, rule following parts, people pleasing parts that would just override it anyway. I would go against my body compass and say yes, even when I was having an aversion response. But now those parts are so unburdened that whenever someone makes a request or there's an option in front of me, I feel immediately an aversion response. I say no. I don't have to have a reason. It's just my body says no. And what that does is it leaves space and open room for me to do what gives me this kind of response, which is things like making these videos and making content and meeting with groups and exploring, inner authority with people. So when we follow our body compass, it makes more and more room for what we love, and what we love and we're fascinated by is what we were meant to do. That's how you find your calling and your purpose in this life, is allowing yourself to follow what brings you to life, and it doesn't matter what that is. It doesn't matter if that makes money or not. You can do another little job to make whatever money you need to take care of your needs, and then spend the rest of your time digging in the earth. It doesn't have to be something useful, right? Maybe you just love to go to the lake and swim. Maybe you love, maybe sometimes things will eventually allow you to make money doing them, but it's really about just allowing yourself to make that space in that room to follow that. Okay. And I suggest allowing ourselves to spend 80 to 90% of our time in the areas that we're passionate about, that we have strength in, that we enjoy, that we're fascinated by. Those things that have that attraction response, 80 to 90% of our time. and only 10 to 20% of our time in a growth area. It's not that we don't want to have challenges, but when we are spending so much of our time in an area where we feel competent and motivated, spending this time in an area where we might feel struggle or failure won't feel like, oh, I'm a failure, because I'm spending this bulk of my time in an area where I'm succeeding and I'm really enjoying. So when I was an educational therapist, quick little story, this is what I would do. Parents would bring to me a child and their achievement scores would say, can't read worth beans, can't write, maybe they're dyslexic or something like that. But this, third grader is college age level in math. I would tell their parents, go get them a math tutor, let them spend 80 to 90% of their time pursuing and following math, because that's what they're good at, that's what they love. And, they can come to me for reading and writing for, 10 to 20% of their time, but don't define them based on their weakness or what they can't do, right? I would have kids who really had a hard time focusing in an academic setting in this chair being still, but they were so athletically inclined. I would say put them in sports and let them spend 80 to 90% of their time exploring their body's abilities, and then a little bit of time, just helping them with the basics of sitting down and doing some academic stuff. Okay, almost done. So prioritize rest and play. There's something that Martha Beck talks about that I absolutely love, which is this infinity symbol. On one side is rest and on the other side is play. And she says, rest until you cannot rest anymore and you are motivated to get up out of your bed or your chair to play. Because again, you're fascinated. Something pulls you up in excitement. And then play and play and play until you don't have the capacity to play anymore. You're tired. And so then you rest. And then you rest until you're pulled up to play again. Play until you need to rest into infinity. Promote observation, experimentation, especially experimentation of one. What is normal for me? Not what's normal for the general population. What do I love? What am I good at? Right? What affects me in a positive or negative way? Adaptation, practicality, assess what's working, what's not working in any given moment, and adapt, pivot. Stress the innate worth of every individual. Have self-awareness of your own innate worth, and then that overflows into the awareness of the innate worth of every individual that connects us. Also, connection to nature. Spend as much time as possible in nature. That is absolutely healing. And if you're in a city, do whatever you can. Bring a plant into your home. Look at your little patch of sky. Watch the clouds, watch the birds. Feel the sunlight on your skin. Feel the breeze on your skin. Put your feet on the ground, bare feet on the ground. Whatever way you can, connect to nature. It will heal you. And focus on holistic things, right? In this is what my hope is for education. Not just your mental capacity and your analytical abilities, but are you emotionally intelligent, socially intelligent, spiritually intelligent, right? Foster all of those things, and really facilitate the basics of well-being, right? Am I getting enough sleep, right? Don't have kids come to school when they're sick. Let them get rest. Take care of themselves. That'll prevent the sickness. Am I getting sunlight? Am I getting water, nutritious food, movement, just the basics? And never, ever cease to be a curious learner and to allow enough stillness and space and downtime in your day to be free, to follow your fascination wherever it leads you in this moment, in this day, in this body, on this planet. So those are some of my personal visions. And, I think as far as changing the education system, I really think it starts individually. It starts with you. It starts with me connecting to our inner authority, to our innate worth, to our body compass, our needs, our emotions, our physical sensations, bringing loving attention to whatever comes up in us, paying attention to our attraction, aversion, response, following our fascination. If each individual were able to do that, we would all be living our purpose. We would all be thriving and our own caregiver, primary caregiver, and then giving from overflow to one another. It wouldn't matter our grades, our achievements, how much money we were making. We would feel happy and have well-being. So, all right, that's a lot. Please feel free to ask questions, make comments, tell me how you feel about the education system in the comments below, and I'll be very happy to interact with you.